Welcome to GovCon Unfiltered, where your journey through the labyrinth of federal contracting begins. I'm Alexa Choi, your guide and host on this epic adventure. Here, we dive deep into the heart of government contracting, shedding light on the heroic tales of those who navigate its complex terrain. Our mission? To bring you closer to the action, revealing the critical steps, triumphant victories, and occasional pitfalls that our intrepid adventurers face. Your journey into the world of government contracting starts now, and we could not be happier to have you with us. Let's embark on this adventure together. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of GovCon Unfiltered. I'm super excited about today's episode. I mean, I run into a lot of dudes in the industry. Actually, facts, everywhere you go, men everywhere. This is a male-dominated industry. And when I ran across this group of leaders, I thought to myself, I have to have them on the show. So today is the day. It's been long coming. I really appreciate you. I'm not going to WikiLeaks who it is or what it is, but one of my favorite companies, favorite gals. So let's go ahead and kick it off and introduce yourselves. Christy, you can go first.
Hi, I'm Christy Holley. I am the account manager for the Department of State at Leidos. And a fun fact about me, I am an energy healer.
Wow, that is a fun fact.
I don't know how I top that. Great to see everybody. Caroline Thomas, also with Leidos, and I am on the growth team here as an account manager focused on the USDA as well as Department of Commerce. The fun fact, I was born in Carolina. I hope to end up in Carolina one day, and I'm a big Tar Heels fan.
Awesome. Perfect. How about you, Arfa?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Arfa Syed. I'm on the growth and strategy team at Leidos, covering the federal funding portfolio in our digital modernization sector. Fun fact about me, I started my GovCon career at NASA. My first act was to go to headquarters and buy astronaut ice cream.
Nice. Nice. And Heather.
Yeah, hi there. I am Heather Carr. I have the privilege of leading these ladies here on our growth team for the civilian market inside of Leidos. My fun fact, there's a whole long history of it, but I'll just go with the opposite of what Christy just said, which is I love to race cars. I've driven around race car tracks many times. And so opposite of energy, calming, and healing, I need her when I'm done with that, but I get all of my energy out in that way.
Well, next time I go skydiving, Heather, it's me and you.
You got it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. Let's jump into it. So first question. So I think, each one of you ladies, has a large network and a lot of people who know you, but what is something about you besides your fun fact that's not in your bio that you can share with the audience today?
The question has a word pivotal. What I'll share is a moment earlier in my deals can go so many different ways. And I think in my early GovCon experiences, learning that lesson inside proposal pit and seeing just how calm, maybe Christy was there and I didn't know, having that energy to you where you can stay calm in that moment, that skill takes time to develop, or I would even call it a muscle, right? Because you go through iterations of it and you get better and better. But I would say that's staying calm in situations has been really helpful. And it's like just a huge asset in this industry to have.
Oh, yeah. You can get worked up in a quickness for sure. How about you, Carolyn?
Sure. So I had to think about this one, but it really kind of goes back to when I first left college and moved up to DC. This was back in 2003. The job market wasn't great. And I actually got my first job at an auto auction out by Dulles Airport, where I was responsible. This is not on my resume my resume, but I was responsible for inside sales, calling Mercedes and BMW dealers across the country and getting them to come to our auction. So this is where I learned, I think, the beginning of the skills for relationship building, right? Very interesting type of client. So who knew that I would still, leverage and utilize those skills today? That was pretty cool.
That sounds like a good way to jump into sales too, right?
Great way.
Yeah, for sure. I think cold calling is like still to this day strikes fear into the heart of people. Even if you could get the best script ever from any LLM, right? It sounds super fancy. But still, get up the phone and calling a stranger, it's like, ooh, that could get your heart rate going. All right, next one is Heather.
Yeah. So I'll take you just before, right? My career really launched and started. I had a coach in my teenage years that took me to the side once upon a time and talked to me about being a leader and what does it mean to be a leader. And it really resonated. I'll keep some of that personal, conversation to myself, but what he shared, I've never, ever let go. And as I started to develop within my career, I really reflect back on that because being a leader has changed over time. And as an example, when, sort of what Arfa was saying in proposal pits, when you're doing what we do, it is all about collaboration. You're not always, from a seniority perspective, the highest person in the room. Sometimes you're the lowest. Sometimes you're the worker bee. Everybody plays a very different role. What I've learned in government contracting in that collaboration cycle is the energy matters, right? And so if I, take a look at what's happening and you're working on a deal that is sometimes 1, 2, even 3 years, right, over a cycle of time, people pivoting in and out, you can become really exhausted and tired. And how do you make sure that everybody on the team who has a critical role really feels the energy? What is it that is going to get them to that excitement point to want to give their very best so that you win in the end? Part of that is always talking about the customer mission. What excites you about the customer mission? Make sure that the person who is working on staffing or the person that's, running the contracts through and signing documents for NDAs, right? Everybody matters. It's not just the mission and the messaging when you're in front of the customer or putting it into the proposal, but understanding who your favorite, customers are, who you're working on for that day. Tie that back to what's happening in office so that everybody is excited about getting up and giving you their best for the day.
That's a really important leadership lesson, making sure everybody understands their piece and feels like they contribute to the overall mission. Absolutely. That's pretty powerful. Thank you for sharing, Christy.
So I was doing project management for Ditcher back in the day, and a leader came to me and put me in the capture program. Before capture was actually a word or a thing, they took a series of us to go learn and do capture. So for a year, I was put into a program and I got to learn different customers. They moved us around almost like an internship. And so that put me at the beginning of capture, which of course tied me into growth. So that changed the trajectory of my career immensely.
It's funny. I get asked a lot about the difference between BD and capture and like, why does it matter? And so I feel like a lot of people are confused about this very topic. What is the difference between the two? And I do think, though, that the bigger the company is, the more distinct those two roles become. But anyways, we're glad you're here, Christy. Thank you for sharing. We will roll into the second question. And what is the most creative strategy you've used to either win contracts or advance in government service that others might be hesitant to try? This is Heather.
So this is mine, right? So, when you think about strategy, certainly you don't want to give away all of your secrets. And, what I try to talk to the team about and what I've, lived by in my career is the old school way of thinking, right? Strategy starts with relationships. I still believe that relationships win business. Getting up every day and showing up to build the relationships again, right? With your partners inside of your own company and then externally, the same way you and I met one day, Alexa, right? You've got to get out and find out who that person is, and who they might know and vice versa. We're all in it, right? To advance and to find out something more about our customers, to get closer to the customers so that we can ultimately solve their problems, right? And so when you think about strategy, it can be just that simple. Getting in front of the customer. What we do, I mentioned it before, it can be a 1, 2, and 3 year long journey, right? To even get into a contract vehicle. What are the ways that you could be creative, right? To show your customer you've got some skin in the game, offer up some other ways so that they can actually provide or receive your solutions faster. What is it that they can do? Is there a contract vehicle that they're not aware of that they could procure on and push that easy button? Is there an OTA that's available? Is there something that helps them or helps even your company advance the message more like our commercial partners often think, right? I think that's the way of the future. And as we're building out always our storytelling, I think this entire team knows that that's one of my favorite, ways to think of what we do. Always, right? Always be prepared with your story And that includes, right, understanding how the commercial market has been doing things for a very long time, right? Faster, and they're there solving problems. And so, we try to focus on that here at Leidos. We do it within our team. We talk about it on a weekly basis. We've got a lot of customers across the civilian space. And so each one of them has a unique problem. And I think getting creative about the actual acquisition cycle and getting faster about the solution process is probably the best advice I could give.
Yeah, that's excellent. I also feel like as a taxpayer, you can feel uniquely tied into, and also a citizen, right? Like you're in these missions every single day. You're experiencing on the end user side them, and they mean something with your families. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And the whole storytelling thing, I think, is underrated, because if you wait to start telling the story until the proposal time, you're already behind the eight ball trying to figure out like why us, right? But if you haven't already told yourselves that story early on in the capture or to the customer the first time you met them, then why would they believe you, right?
Absolutely. And repeat it, right? Tell the story. And again, bring the energy to your team. Make sure
Yeah,
they're telling the story. If I could just expand a little bit,
sure.
I could cheat a little bit. And I guess maybe it's not cheating, but you learn from really great people, right? Leaders along the way. And one of my very favorite CIOs that I ever worked with and collaborated with was Jamie Holcomb at USPTO. I know Caroline knows him well. He is all about better, cheaper, faster. Yeah. So many years ago, I think it's actually even on a plaque in his wall, but many years ago, he was sitting in his office. We talked about that. And of course, that's what you want, but it's how do you actually do that? Right. And so again, putting some skin in the game and doing a little bit of homework, right, on how that might benefit and solve their problems right then, not just in a technology solution, is a great way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And what a legend. He's a hashtag legend. All right. Next question is for Arfa. When you think about your network, what has been your most effective approach for not just building connections, but really turning them into meaningful, beneficial relationships? And I also have to say before I hand it over to you, I met you at many different networking events, and it was just so wonderful to see you smiling and talk about bringing the energy. My goodness. So yeah, I'm excited to hear what is your mastermind way to do this?
I will say just being true to yourself, who you are. I pride myself on being a connector. So it's not just about what somebody can do for me, it's what I can do for other people, and finding those connection points between others, right? If somebody says like, hey, do you know anyone looking for a career in XYZ? I have an opening. Me going back to my network and saying, I think I know just the person. You've now solved a problem for someone, right? So that has gone such a long way for me, I would say. Just being that person, being that connector to say like, how can I help you? What can I do for you? I think people realize that when you don't just come up to them in a moment of need, that goes a really long way, right? And I remember being at a conference and it was a government speaker on the stage and they said, know me before you need me, right? And that's
so easy, right?
Right? So a lot of times, like when you're in business development or even capture, right? Just in this business, people, they just want constantly hammer you for meetings, right? And I think that standpoint of like trying to get to know someone for like what they're trying to do versus for your selfish reasons of like, I need to get this meeting on the books so that I can go back to my company and check a box, the difference shows. And so that's something that I always pride myself with.
So, and Arfa, when you first started at Leidos, had you met any of the lovely ladies that you're here with today before somewhere?
I did. So this goes back to connecting, right? I knew Caroline from ActiveAct. We had been at the same leadership program.
Christy, I did not know, but we have a mutual friend in common. And so our first day, we started, I think, a day apart. And our first day, we realized that we had this connection in common, who's one of our favorite people in GovCon. And so we just connected over that. Heather, I knew was going to be my boss, and I did not know her. So then
Thanks, LinkedIn.
I looked at her LinkedIn and I said, who knows her too? And then I reached out to them.
And I said, tell me everything I need to know about my new boss.
Yeah. And she called me her new boss before she came into the interview.
Oh, there you go. Way to manifest.
Oh, yeah.
That Arfa carries, and you can tell. It's incredible.
I love that. And it's funny that companies that do hard interviews and all the things don't realize that the BD capture folks talk. And we absolutely text each other and they're like, hey, I see you're connected to this person. Have you worked with them? Have you worked for them? Do you trust them? I get those texts all day long. And so I feel like, I hope nobody's, putting me on record for this. Don't say this text, but it's just like one more thing to keep in mind and how you have to show up in a positive way, and not
I'm really trying to impress Heather. So I had a conversation with a friend and I said, how do I impress her? And I'm here. So I guess their advice worked.
I didn't either. We're learning something here.
I've heard this before, so it's okay.
I love that. No, and it's great. It's like things worked out the right way, right? Because what a team. It's just incredible. But you know what? Speaking from like a Brene Brown standpoint, being vulnerable like that will always make somebody like you more, not less.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm interested from Caroline and Heather. Could you share a recent example of how you've helped somebody else succeed in this industry, and what unexpected benefits came back to you from that?
Sure. To jump in. I'll keep this pretty quick because I could probably go on, but I have a very dear friend who I actually met when I was with a small business for about 8.5 years. She came in about 2 years behind me, but we instantly connected. We had a really similar background, single moms, just working really hard, trying to, figure out the industry. And so she and I just connected, and I kind of knew in that moment I wanted to do whatever I could to just make sure that she was well connected, right? She knew kind of the tricks of the trade, and however I could help, accelerate her, I wanted to do that. So we had a great time working together, trying to mentor her along the way. And then when I joined Leidos actually in 2021, I had been encouraging her to kind of get out and explore, right, and make sure that she had so much to offer. And I felt like she really, it was time to kind of expand her wings, right? And so I said, hey, you should check out Leidos. It's great. There's so much opportunity for growth. And I found out she was actually starting to look and kind of ready to take that step. And so I helped connect her with the right folks internally at Leidos. And fast forward, she's actually working for us today. They put her on some of the hardest proposals. She's a proposal manager. And so right when she came in the door, they sort of said, here you go. Here's a couple of really hard, proposals, but I knew that she would crush it, and she did. She submitted them successfully, and I've heard great feedback from her. So, and now I get to work with her at Leidos. So that's just one example and one person. I won't say the name, but she knows she's out there. So
I love it. And it's like my dream one day to start a company with the favorite people I've ever worked for and worked with, right? It almost doesn't matter what the goal is. It's just like you want to do cool stuff with cool people.
yep, exactly.
And then Heather. How about you?
Yeah. So a little bit different from the recruiting side of the house. Internally, right? Anytime, and I try to tell people when we meet, teaming conversations, it's part of what we do, right? Throughout every single bit. Who are we, potentially you're vetting, they're vetting you, partnering, but it's not always about a single opportunity. When you're lucky enough to support, right, and lead inside of a company the size of Leidos, right, or others of our size, we've got agencies and customers, right, across the entire United States government. And so while the conversation that you're having might be single focus, I always end the calls with, who else do you need to know? How can I help connect you? Send me an email. Do you need somebody in defense? Do you need somebody in intel? Where can I, support? And I feel like going back to that, you give a little, you get a little. Everybody is here to try to connect, and in the end, provide some solutions. And so whether it's my customer or theirs or somebody else's, I think that's a really good way to just lift up and try to open the door, because customers are hard to get into, but sometimes, you can get lost and along your way trying to find the right people inside of really large companies, and everybody's busy, even inside of small, right? So opening the doors in that way, I think is important.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of a book called The Go-Giver, which is like a play on words of the go-getter. And it really talks a lot about the fact of like forgetting about what you need, making sure that the person gets what they need and gets more than they need will always come back to you. It's like a reverse thinking of what you'd think needs to happen in these kind of, conversations and interactions. But I totally agree with you. I think that they would remember you because of it. And being memorable, especially from a teaming contracting kind of a perspective, is what you want to be. When somebody needs you and like their small business deal just went large, they're going to pick up the phone and call you.
Absolutely. We can't do this without our small business partners, right? Sometimes the opportunities are so large, we have to, have partners of our equal size, right? And you get really creative about those relationships. But yeah, it's not a singularly focused industry. That's not how things are done around here. And you got to, adjust and make sure that you're on top of that.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. Okay, so Christy, we haven't heard a lot from you, so I'm really excited. No pressure, but if you could go back and give yourself some advice, baby Christy, when you were just starting out, what would you say about balancing the competition and collaboration in the space? And I love that Heather just kind of softballed to you that you guys have to work with the larges also. And I know that it's a competitive space out there when you're working with another similarly situated company.
Yeah, the key is to not let competition have you lose sight of working with others. So, competition can drive you, but collaboration for me can trigger me to grow and learn more. So, back to Heather's point, reach out, make those connections, share ideas. I learn something every day from everyone on this call, right? Of things that I wasn't aware of or things I need to advance. But even back to small business partners, other large businesses, and currently in the times we're in, collaboration is going to help move us all as we're traversing this space. So to me, it's the striking the balance of competition and collaboration, but making sure collaboration doesn't get forgotten and understand the value of what that means. And it ties together what we've talked about, right? Your network, how helping each other, we all support each other. It helps advance us. It's the rising tide theory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of a follow-on question. When it comes to like building your network, I get asked a lot by folks like, how do I know which events to attend? How do I know, who to talk to at those events? What do I even say to these people if I've not been to a lot of these events? So what's your best approach at handling that?
Find Arfa. No, I'm kidding.
Who's gonna punch?
Yes.
You can just throw up a headshot of Arfa. We'll be fine. No, first off, you have to look at the major events, right? Look at the ACAC events, look at the GovJam events. Which ones are going to be an environment where people are relaxed and they're comfortable so that they will feel a conversation. I think if you start at some of those events that allow for more of a relaxed atmosphere so folks feel comfortable engaging. Also, what I would recommend is start looking through LinkedIn before you go and creating folks you want to know. It could be customer, it could be industry, it could be somebody that you're just wanting to look for mentorship, but almost create your list of folks of, I want to introduce myself and have conversations with these individuals, or at least get them familiar with who I am. So that would be my recommendation.
I love that.
Having a thick skin, right? Sometimes you might introduce yourself and someone might not ever want to talk to you again. And that's okay, right? Sometimes you might say something and it didn't sit well, or like that story you told didn't resonate with someone the way you intended it for. So having that thick skin of like, there's a lot of different events. There's, people are very busy. So don't take it personally when someone hasn't gotten back to you or hasn't gotten back to you right away. That's my biggest takeaway, I would say.
The buddy system helps, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The buddy system, alcohol. I mean, there are a lot of ways to approach it. Yeah.
Without buddies. All of the above.
All of the above. Yeah, no, I do think I personally love those heart-pounding situations when you're walking into a room and you're like, and I know nobody. That's good. It's an opportunity to meet people and talk. And, I oftentimes like to make a lot of jokes and not take it too seriously. I think that's another maybe way of handling it. Maybe that's just the way I handle it. I don't know. So looking ahead to the next few years, and I know that now is a really kind of like a wild time for all of us, but if we could like look into our crystal ball and see what emerging opportunities that you think others might be overlooking and how can folks kind of position themselves to take advantage of these opportunities. I think we're going to go Arfa, Carolyn, Christy, Heather.
Okay, great.
I think one of the best things that anyone can do right now is lean on the connections that they have and find out like what are the things that they're working on that's important to them, starting with customers, right? Understanding where they want to go and then backing up from there. I think also having relationships outside of government contracting, I think has really helped me. Like I have a lot of friends that are in Silicon Valley tech companies and I love talking to them. And sometimes when we talk about AI, for example, they'll ask me like, what is your best use case of AI? And the reaction to some of it, right? They're like, really? That's where you guys are right now? But having those conversations, right? It motivates me to want to bring AI into serving customer missions even more, right? When they tell me what they're doing. And I'm so proud of some of the tech partnerships that Leidos has for that reason, right? Because I know ending in that direction. And so I think looking at those emerging opportunities from like a tech standpoint, but also from relationships and other industries, that's a huge way to position yourself today.
What great advice. That's actually really good advice. Yeah. Perfect. All right. So Carolyn, how about you?
Yeah, I'll definitely sort of parlay a little bit of what Arfa shared, but from the standpoint of I look at over the next couple years, both how government may change how they buy, right? And kind of to her point, what they buy. And so, from the what they buy perspective, thinking about the Silicon Valley companies, right? Or some of the commercial companies that offer really creative, unique solutions that maybe the government hasn't really thought about before, or they've been a little bit too or more risk averse, right? To kind of go with what they know. And so I think there's going to be a great opportunity to expand your network and collaborate with new and different types of companies that offer some of these new services. From the standpoint of just also the how they buy, right? We understand that sometimes, it takes a little while, right, for some of these acquisitions to go through. We've always used the best in class vehicles, right? And some of these contract vehicles, but we know that it can take a while. And so the need for acceleration for those services, I think we've just seen such a kind of glaring, right? Like it's just becoming so much more important to get those services to the government faster. So Heather mentioned OTAs, right? Or just other kind of quicker ways for the government to get to what ultimately they need to make their mission successful. So if you're not thinking about that, I think even from a company perspective, how are we going to help, push our companies to think about that and say, we need to be quicker, right? We need to be prepared to be more agile to move forward.
Right. So I do know that not every agency has the OTA authority, but after seeing that latest and greatest thing that came out of the DoD saying you shall use OTAs, I think the CSOs and things along those lines for the civilian markets are going to become the next hottest thing. So yeah, how do you make sure you're first in line? How do you make sure that your company knows what they are, how to use them? I remember working with a bigger company back in the day and they were not as familiar, and so the fact that you guys are talking about it, looking at it, you're like already way ahead of the game. It's just so good to see. All right, Christy, how about you?
Well, piggybacking on, I think just going a little bit deeper in the opportunities from a technology standpoint and highlighting the vendors we're starting to use, that intersection of biometrics and quantum. And it's back to what Arfa and Caroline were saying. We're going to have the vehicles and the network, but these are the technologies that are coming, right? And are we looking at those? Where are we today? How do we advance it? Because it's changing for our customers. So how do we look at through that lens? Because putting those two things together is an unbreakable vault if you think about it for cyber threats. So that's another aspect that I'm interested in. But again, collaboration piece, if there are folks that are starting to look at quantum, let me know. But start looking at use cases, right? How do you dig a little deeper? And also some of the applications and biometrics of how they can evolve in quantum. So
yeah, for sure. I think quantum, blockchain even, I think blockchain is going to get a big glow up as well. So I think from an emerging tech perspective is a very exciting time to be here. And Heather, I'm passing it over to you to close us out.
Yeah. So if anybody knows me, and obviously the audience will get to know the most favorite part of what we do and what I do and what keeps me excited is focusing on all things data, right? And what made data even more exciting was the introduction years ago, right, of AI. And it can be overused these days, but tying AI and what to watch for the future when it comes to cybersecurity specifically, the SOC of the future is what we should all be focusing on. It's taking us some time, right? So the moment that we have the next cool, shiny tool and technology, something has changed, right? Especially when it comes to our adversaries. And so, protecting the systems that, are functioning inside of our government agencies and their SOCs is going to be critical. Automating those processes is the future of what we're going to do, making sure that the analysts have the tools that are necessary to make them as smart as possible, right? Efficiently. The SOC of the future when it comes to AI is everything. If you're not seeing it now, you should be watching for that coming along the way. When I got to know Leidos and capabilities, we have an incredible solution in that area that has come and tried and true from, right, the intel side of the house. And then it typically starts on that side, right, when it comes from a cyber perspective or DoD.
Mm-hmm.
We're really lucky, right, to sort of be in that advanced phase of what we're able to offer. And tying AI back to, right, all things data, right, we're going to see more and more geospatial, right, out in the market. The types of information that we're gathering is of all different shapes, sizes, right, types. And so what do we do with that data? How do we make sense of it? After all, it's all just text and font and numbers at the end of the day. If we can't actually make informed decisions, off of the data, then it's just a bunch of stuff, right? That you have to sit through and filter through. And so really getting in front of that and using the AI tools and introducing those to your customers is going to be what we're focused on, I'm sure, for the next several years and until we, learn and continue to learn. But I think that's what makes what we do a whole lot of fun, right? It's never the same on a different day.
Absolutely. Never a dull moment. And I just wanted to say for the audience, the SOC that you mentioned a couple times stands for Security Operations Center, in case nobody knew, because, acronyms in this industry, you never know. But I think the Security Operations Center and bringing AI into it is going to be transformational because finding qualified cyber talent is a major challenge for the government, for big companies, for everybody across the board. So really being able to use less humans and more AI in the ways that make better sense, not worse sense, if there's a way, then I think that's the true opportunity for the government and for companies like Leidos, who is an industry leader in that area.
Right. Yeah. When you take a look at the cybersecurity, even in the infrastructure, right across a lot of the aging systems, in most, or, we'll call it most of the government agencies, aging infrastructure that once upon a time was modern, right?
Right.
It worked for all of those needs. But again, with the adversaries that are, knocking at the door and trying to get in any way that we can, we're going to see, right, modernization really kick off. And that's exciting for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, ladies. Really appreciated it. And catch us next time on GovCon Unfiltered.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.